are honored to have this man come to talk to us about bridging the digital divide, lessons from the internet for Bitcoin regulation. He is a PhD holder in computer science. He's a BA in engineering science, and he is the founder of Ghana.com. Kindly help me in welcoming and appreciating Dr. Nii Quaynor. Kindly appreciate him better, guys. Dear speakers, when you see me stand here as you're speaking, that means your time is up, and I might join you on stage.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much for the kind introduction. I'm so very pleased to have a chance to speak to your audience. And I'm also glad that I got some good feedback. And I'm also glad that I had good chance to get feedback from the organizers regarding the content. Anyway, I'm here to continue the discussions we are having on policies, regulations, whatever arrangements regarding Bitcoin and the related technologies. What I'll try to do is to look back a little bit on what was happening regarding the internet, and then try to distill some lessons from there and see how it might apply to the case of Bitcoin. Now, I'll do so by looking at three specific areas which I think are regulated. The first, of course, has to do with the financial side, and because of policy, we have to narrow things to a specific context, and I'll use the context of Ghana, where I can also afford to be authoritative. So I'll tell you some of the things going on in the regulatory regime, and then also take a look at the power side, because there's a good opportunity for us to make an impact there. And then also the workforce development side is equally important to us. Now, Bitcoin and internet have something in common, and they appear to be trying to change the norms by doing certain things that governments were normally, interested in doing. So I'll try and look at how that separation between the telco, from separating the telco from the state, might look similar to separating money from the state. Now, what we know is that even though the separation occurs, as in the case of the internet, it eventually ends up consolidating, but differently from what we all might have anticipated. Okay, in the case of Ghana, there was no regulator for internet or telecom. It was all built in one organization, that was the National Telco. The National Telco was the policymaker, was the regulator, and was also the operator at the time. So with the advent of the internet from around 93 to 95, they had to install a regulator whose function was simply to regulate that sector. As we went along, the Pioneer ISP got shut down, and then the market exploded, everybody picking up the PCs, the telcos got involved, and the government also started having their own networks. But the internet infrastructure developed, and now we even had registrars who were responsible for putting names into the registries. Thereafter, we saw consolidation appear, and that is the situation right now. The lesson here is that, you have to maintain the dialogue with policy authority. Okay, we have to maintain the dialogue with policy authority. Anyway, we have to maintain the dialogue with policy authority. And that dialogue requires that we each stay in our roles. And meaning that the policymaker needs to do his bit, so does the academic side of the fence, and at the same time, Okay, so I end up going a little bit ahead. Good, good. Let me go backwards and see if I can. Good. All right, thank you very much. So the whole thing is about participation, it's about engagement, it's about dialogue, talking to people you normally will not talk to, okay? And the policymaker must talk to the engineer, must talk to the business people, must talk to the community whose interests must be protected, and all of this must happen at the same time. And it has to be extensive in the sense that if you just do it casually, you will not get the depth that is required. You need, of course, a favorable policy climate, political climate, political environment. But most important, the champions that you are building must be coordinated. If they go isolated, there will be no chance, okay? Now, in the case of Bitcoin, crypto, and so on, there were regulators in place. There was a central bank, economic crimes organization, financial intelligence, so it was all over the place, which means that we couldn't even have a chance to land. Right from day one, there were questions being raised that, who is going to do this? Is it the Securities Exchange Commission or is it going to be the Bank of Ghana? And at the same time, why are you getting involved in this? This is not your business. So there was lots of things. That was the big thing. So in roughly 2020, there was a first attempt to push the system, which is one of the things we tried to do, which was to ask for a license, to provide payment services around Bitcoin. Immediately, a regulatory sandbox was created, and that proposal was thrown into the sandbox. Then they followed it up with their own central bank digital currency, ECD, and then they went on to create a gold coin, 1 ounce coins, and then establish a virtual assets service provider task force, which eventually came out with a draft exposure, which is of interest. Now, but before I elaborate on that, looking at the context, African context, I usually like to share this BitNodes thing because it's one indicator of how hard Africa is contributing to the global Bitcoin. The map on the left is where we were in 91 with respect to the internet. And you notice that the purple side, which is supposed to be the full connectivity, meaning the permanently on with the global, we had very little of it on the continent. And if you look at the one on the right of the BitNodes, it reflects a similar thing, which means we are still catching up, trying to adopt the internet, which means we need to work harder. Okay, even though we've made progress, let's get more nodes out there and let's get more coins into our wallets as well. What's really going on? There's tension, okay, and the tension is natural. So I'm borrowing this from the blockchain governance initiative effort. The engineers don't have good communication with regulators. We don't have much common language. At the same time, we are anxious, to beat the technology maturity by going to business. Meanwhile, the businesses we are creating, they don't want to have conflict of any sort with regulator, meaning want to avoid friction. But the speeds at which, business works is different from the speed at which the regulator responds, okay? And all this creates tension, because you don't know what to do. At the same time, we are moving towards the consumer, so we must be transparent and quite public in what we do. So this is the basis of the conflicts we are seeing, without pointing at somebody saying that someone is not doing the right thing. Okay, in the case of Ghana, around August 2024, they came out with a draft, exposure draft. And there, they attempted to keep the two worlds separate, okay? And then try to have some control in the middle as to what each side can do, including using a sandbox. On the left, which is the traditional banks and the payment service providers, they said they cannot hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. But the stuff on the right, they are permitted to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. But organizations, shareholders in the green side can form virtual asset service provider companies. The only distinction is that there should be no money taken from the old organization to establish the new organization. Now, this is big, eh? Because for the first time, they are saying some company can keep Bitcoin on their balance sheet. That means you are almost to the point of tax. That's meaning the currency Bitcoin is being recognized in the tax regime. This is what is coming. So even though they may not see it, to me, this is a very positive thing. You are saying that, oh, there's an exception who can keep Bitcoin. Before you said nobody can. But now we've moved to that level. This has implications because it puts a liquidity pressure. In the payment side, you must pay all merchants in the local currency, in this case, cedis. So if a customer wants to pay a merchant, in a sense, the payment service provider facing the merchant and facing the customer must take the Bitcoin and give it to somebody else and get, the local currency to pay the merchant. Now, you don't have to do it on every transaction. You can accumulate it, end of the day, dump it to the virtual asset service provider, okay, and then get your cash. Or he could have given you cash ahead, and then you spend from there, depending on the arrangement. But the main thing is, at the end of the day, the one on the left should not have any Bitcoin on his balance sheet. And this is the way we can make it work. There are these other issues as to fiscal and also monetary challenges. We call them the twin challenges in the Kinchugi study that we had done earlier with Pinder and co. Here, the point is that normally, central banks, governments are used to taxes. So they fix the tax and they fix it in their currency. Now, where is the tax? The person is holding some euro or something or some other coin. So you're going to need some mechanism by which you will solve that. So you have a fiscal substitution challenge. You also have monetary sovereignty challenges, okay, in that your currency may be in the process of being substituted, depending on how you look at it. The main point here is central banks are very, very concerned about capital transfer and tracking them, okay? And so it will require extensive multi-stakeholder discussion in order for us to get the right balance. It's an issue of surveillance versus innovation or development. Now, on the power side, this is what the architecture looks like. We have independent power producers, all together producing about 4 gigawatts, 61% thermal, and 38 or so hydro. But there's a transmission network that delivers the power to the hydro, to the distribution networks, and there are 2 of them. Now, today the agreements are such that if you don't take the power, you pay. So we want to finagle this regulatory arrangement. So if I can't take the power, I will order you to mine for me, okay? Because it's almost like buying the debt back. So this is what we intend to massage in the policy discussions to come. So here you can either join the power architecture and convince, the distributor to obtain the, to allow you to mine for him, by in essence his debt. You could of course find an isolated power, station and do it yourself, and it's even feasible to do mining at home. There was a time when it was not, which was in 2015. I think price might have been around 500 or so when we were trying. It did not, sustain itself. Now let's look at the very last message I have here. I'm trying to rally policymakers to look at the education quadrant, because the other 2, in a way, are being addressed by us. Okay, meaning we are doing some good work in the community building area, we're documenting our work, and we are engaging and pushing to engage with policymakers and so on. And we have some engineering activity going. So that side, I think we are moving. The harder bit, in my opinion, is in the formal education system. And there, we need to figure out how we're going to strengthen, you might say the foundational backgrounds that can support the growth that we are pushing. So this is my last slide. My takeaway here is that although we've made some good progress in the workforce development area and in the engineering areas, we have challenges that will require reform of our curriculums. We have not fully finished reforming it for networks and distributed systems. Now you are adding game theory, and you are adding other kinds of issues, especially cryptography, which I am very concerned. If we don't build capacity in there, we might lose the fight in the long run. Okay, with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this has been useful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nii. Kindly help me in appreciating him. Thank you so much.